We have a treat today with Dr. Mathews, who is always really, really good. So I look forward to listening to these. He is going to talk to us a bit today on the economics of illegal immigration. If you see me leave right before, I've got a class at 12:30, so I may have to sneak out just before, but we look forward to hearing Dr. Mathews.
Thanks, Tony. Do I need a microphone, or should I be okay?
You're good.
Okay. So thank you all for coming to this little talk on some economics of illegal immigration. This is obviously a very controversial issue. So it'll be a lot of fun, and it's an issue, it seems to me, that's approached more often than not with a lot of emotion. And we're not going to do that. We're going to approach illegal immigration with a calm use of reason and careful evaluation of evidence, which is a lot of fun. In fact, I don't know about you, but I find the calm application of reason and careful evaluation of evidence a lot more fun than emotional splavocation. So that's what we're going to do. And also, what makes this fun is when one applies the calm use of reason and careful evaluation of evidence to this topic, some of the most commonly held views about illegal immigration go out the window. For instance, even before we get to the economics, most of you have probably heard of the estimates of the size of the illegal immigrant population. The estimates that you usually hear are 11 million, somewhere around 11 million in the country now. A very commonly held view is that these estimates are totally bogus. They're not to be believed because there is no way an illegal immigrant is going to honestly answer a Census Bureau survey question that asks, if you're an immigrant, are you legal or illegal, right? No illegal immigrant is going to answer that honestly, so the estimates are totally bogus. Well, in fact, the estimates are probably pretty accurate, and guess what? Nobody, not the Census Bureau or anybody else, even asks that question. The estimate is derived entirely without having to ask that question. So we'll look at that. And then with the economics, the economics we'll look at is primarily how illegal immigration affects native-born workers. And a very commonly held view about illegal immigration is that illegal immigrants reduce our wages and take our jobs. It's a commonly held view about immigration in general. In fact, the evidence suggests otherwise. And not only that, the evidence suggests that illegal immigration is beneficial to the very people that it's supposed to hurt, which are lesser educated, low-skilled, native-born workers. And then another very commonly held view is that our welfare state and our social safety net programs are a magnet for illegal immigrants. This is really easily refuted. Okay? So that's what we're going to talk about in the time we have. So first things first. Here's how we get the estimate for the illegal immigrant population. This is referred to, this method of estimating the illegal population is called the residual method. And you can see it's just the estimate of the illegal population is just the difference between the estimate of the total foreign-born population in the country, that's all immigrants, and the population of legal immigrants. The total foreign-born population, or immigrants, comes from the Census Bureau. This comes from their American Community Survey, which is a huge survey. It's conducted every month. Over the course of the year, more than 3 million people are surveyed by the Census Bureau. This is where an awful lot of the Census Bureau data comes from, the American Community Survey. So this is a survey that, again, does not ask anyone, does not ask any immigrant, are you legal or illegal? Doesn't ask the question. From this survey, we just get the estimate of the total number of immigrants in the country. Okay, so we get that. And then there's the estimate of the legal foreign-born population. This comes from the Department of Homeland Security. So the Department of Homeland Security has all these records. You know, we're part of the Immigration and Naturalization Service. Now that's part of Homeland Security. So they have all these records of people who entered the country legally at one point in time, right? So they have a record of all these legal entrants over time. And that's where we get the legal foreign-born population. Again, nobody's asked, are you legal or are you illegal? Right? The estimate of the legal population comes from all these Department of Homeland Security documents going way, way, way back. Okay, so the estimate of the illegal population, you can see, is actually pretty simple. You get total number of immigrants, subtract legal immigrants, and there you go. That's the illegal population. It's a little more complex than that because there's some adjustments that are made to each population. Specifically, the Census Bureau has figured out, along with academic demographers, that the Census Bureau, the American Community Survey, probably understates, undercounts lower income people by roughly 10%. And, you know, a lot of illegal immigrants also have lower incomes. So this estimate is sort of generated iteratively in a number of rounds. So we would get the initial estimate of the illegal population, and it's automatically increased by 10% to correct for undercounting. The legal immigrant population, requires a little more adjustments, and these are the adjustments. All right, so what the Department of Homeland Security has all these documents of legal entrants, people who entered the country legally over time. Well, some of those people are dead, right? They're not here anymore, and so to figure out the legal immigrants who have died, we don't keep track of that stuff. So that's estimated through mortality tables. Mortality tables for year of birth, sex, place of birth, etc. So that's where that adjustment comes from. Then we add to that people who did not enter the country legally, but they attained legal status. For example, a very common example of that would be a person who has a family member here. That's the standard way you become, you get legal permanent residence is you have a family member here. Okay, so you apply for legal permanent residence, your green card, that can take a while. And in some cases, that can take years. So what some people do is they enter the country illegally, then they get the green card, and they're now legal permanent residents. So we have to add those people to the group. And then there's my favorite category, the legal immigrants. And these are people who came to the country legally and left. There are a lot of people in this category. There's actually a large percentage of immigrants, actually both legal and illegal, who come into the country and within 5 years they're gone. They're gone. So we have to take account of that. And the Department of Homeland Security has estimates for all these things. And then we have to subtract visa overstays from that population. a large percentage of illegal immigrants are people who came in legally with a visa, and then the visa expired and they stayed here. That's, the estimates are somewhere between 30 and 50% of the illegal population is actually visa overstays. So the Department of Homeland Security has a method of estimating that. So those are the adjustments that are made. I didn't mean to get too nerdy or geeky on you, but those are the adjustments that are made. The upshot is this estimate of the illegal population, it was developed in roughly the mid-'80s, and it has been vetted and refined ever since by all these people, Census Bureau people, Department of Homeland Security people, before Immigration and Naturalization, and then academics galore. So this is not a seat-of-the-pants number. And there are a number of academics and institutions, and then the Department of Homeland Security, that come up with estimates for the illegal population, and here they are. So there's the Department of Homeland Security. You can see their estimates are sort of sketchy, and they wait, they're starting to do it on a regular basis now, but they wait for final American Community Survey numbers to come in, so their estimates are always a few years behind. But they're doing this on an annual basis now. Then Pew is the Pew Research Center. They're often quoted as with the 11 million plus or minus figure. And then the CMS there is the Center of Migration Studies, which is another think tank. Both Pew and the Center of Migration Studies, Center for Migration Studies, they're, what would you call them? They're non-denominational think tanks, right? They try to be on the level. They make no policy recommendations. Their whole purpose is to generate as accurate numbers as possible. So there are the numbers. You can see from the CMS estimates that the illegal population increases pretty rapidly from 1990 to 2004, 2005. And since then, there have been some fluctuations, but it's really leveled off. But there you go. Those are in thousands, by the way. So that's, we have Pew with the most recent estimate, 11.3 million, and then CMS has it coming in at 10.9 million. The reason for the difference is they use different assumptions about both correcting for the undercount and then mortality tables and the other little nuances we discussed. Okay, so we also know from Census Bureau surveys, a range of them and through statistical methods, demographers have been able to impute a lot of different characteristics to the illegal immigrant population. So for instance, there's a survey that the Census Bureau conducts regularly called the Survey of Income and Program Participation. It's a survey that tries to measure participation in lots of different social safety net programs of all sorts of people. This is a survey that asks people their legal status. And what's interesting about the survey, it's not as, it doesn't survey as many people as the American Community Survey. But from the SIP, as it's called, Survey of Income and Program Participation, you can generate estimates of the illegal population. And the estimates that are generated are almost just like these, which suggests what? It suggests illegal immigrants actually respond to a fairly high rate to the Census Bureau surveys. Just a curious thing. Anyway, here are some characteristics of the illegal population. So this is basically 2014 data. Okay, so you can see a little more than half of the unauthorized or illegal immigrant population is from Mexico. Those are the 5 leading countries. Okay, about a quarter of illegal immigrants are from Asia, and that percentage is growing. Here's the years of residence. This is a little deceiving because this is not continuous years of residence. The illegal population is unbelievably mobile. They move back and forth. They move around the country a ton. They move across the border a lot. Right? They're the most mobile people in the labor force by far, which turns out to be really important when we look at the economic effects of illegal immigration. So you can see, half. So that's a little deceiving. These people are bouncing around all over the place. But there's the breakdown for years of residence in the U.S. Okay, here's the age group. This is probably not surprising. The vast majority are of working age. So this is the percentage of, as you can see, the percentage of unauthorized immigrants 15 years and older, and who they're residing with and what their parental status is. So you can see a third reside with children who are citizens. What does that mean? Their children were born here. And then only 6% reside with children who are not citizens, which means they brought them over with them. And then 61%, you can see, they reside with no children. That turns out to be significant when we look at social safety net programs and illegal immigration. So here's the levels of educational attainment of illegal immigrants aged 25 and older. So, half have less than 12 years of school. No high school diploma, no GED. And you can see there are a little more than 13% have a bachelor's degree or more. I don't know if you find those numbers at all surprising, but that's what they are. That compares to the U.S. population, native-born population. There's about 9% of the native-born population with less than a high school degree. And of the total foreign-born population, there's about 23, 24% with less than high school degrees for educational attainment. So these are the industries and occupations where there are relatively large percentages of illegal immigrants. Illegal immigrants make up 5% of the labor force. 5%. So these are all industries with, those are percentages of unauthorized workers in the industry. Right, so 5% of the labor force, 16% of workers in agriculture are illegal immigrants, 12% in construction, and on down the line. And then there's occupations. I don't think any of that is very surprising, but those are the numbers. And then here's a little more detail. Okay, so industries with high shares of unauthorized immigrants. This is 2012 data. So you can see the share over there is the percentage of workers in the industry that are illegals. Okay, and there are the numbers. The construction number is really high, but it's just 12% of the industry. And then here are occupations. Okay, again, I don't know if I find this surprising, or not. But again, that share just is the percentage of all workers in that occupation that are illegal immigrants. So what you see here, what's curious about illegal immigration is there are some industries and occupations with high concentrations of illegal immigrants, but there are lots of other industries and occupations which they're not there at all. Okay, so the next thing is, that's the demographics, just characteristics of the illegal population. So now we'll get into the economics. Okay, so it's a very common view that illegal immigrants reduce wages and reduce employment of native-born workers. And again, as you know, that's just a subset of a very common belief that immigrants in general reduce our wages and take our jobs, our meaning native-born workers. Well, economists have done a ton of research on this, on the effects of immigrants in general on the wages and employment of native-born workers. Some of you were here for the thing I did in November. Most of you were not, but some of you were. That was the show, right, on the economic effects of immigration on wages and employment of native-born workers. So economists have been looking at this for decades, and they've been looking at it in a lot of different ways. And so a natural question is, well, would that analysis, would that research shed any light on the question of whether illegal immigrants reduce the wages and employment of native-born workers, or if so, what is their effect? If they do affect native-born wages and employment, what is the effect? And in fact, that research sheds a lot of light on how illegal immigration would affect native-born workers. And this is why. What economists are looking at is, well, here's the way economists would approach this. There's a level of educational attainment in the native-born population, just like we looked at for illegal immigrants. And there are levels of educational attainment in the foreign-born population. And so what's glaringly obvious is the percentages in the middle are pretty close, but they're different at the ends. Specifically, there's a significantly larger percentage of foreign-born workers that have less than a high school degree. You know, a much more significant percentage than native-born workers without a high school degree. And also at the other end, the percentage of foreign-born workers with a master's degree, with greater than a bachelor's degree, is higher than it is for native-born workers, but not by that much. The biggest difference is in the percentage of lesser skilled workers in the two populations. And so what economists argue is, well, here come these immigrants. There's a disproportionate number of unskilled immigrants, right, to native-born unskilled workers. And so if anybody is going to be harmed by the influx of immigrants, it would be those lesser educated, lesser skilled workers, right? So the focus of economic research on immigration in general is, how are lesser skilled native-born workers affected by immigration? This is the thing in which economists have done tons of research on. And what the research finds is, well, it's a little varied, but it's easy to generalize. A bunch of studies find that immigration has small but negative effects on native-born wages and employment. A bunch of studies find that immigration has small but positive effects on native-born wages and employment. And a bunch of studies find there are basically no effects at all. So the conservative take is, in the short run, immigration has little, if any, effect on wages and employment of native-born workers. If you allow for more time, if you don't look at the immediate effects and look at the effects over the course of 3-5 years, the effects are small but positive, right? And that is sort of odd to people, that, okay, here are all these workers coming in. How could that possibly have, over a period of time, a positive effect on the wages and employment of native-born workers? And the answer to that is because the influx of immigrants has more than just a supply-side effect. It has several demand-side effects. So you know what I'm talking about, supply and demand in the labor market. So the supply-side effect is the obvious one. Here come all these workers selling their labor and competing against everyone else in the labor market for wages and employment, right? So you would figure at least, at the very least, that would tend to push wages down for native-born workers. But that's not all that happens with immigration. Immigrants are not only workers, they're consumers. They buy things. And so the influx of immigration leads to not just an increase in the supply of labor, it causes an increase in the demand for goods, which leads to an increase in the demand for labor, which tends to push employment and wages up in opposition to the effect of the increase in supply of labor. That's not the only demand side effect, right? That's not the only demand side effect. Another effect that's observed is immigrants and native-born workers are not perfect substitutes for each other. They are not at all. They're, in most cases, they're quite different. Native-born workers tend to have better English communication skills than immigrants. So what starts to happen in areas with influxes of immigrants is there's a change in the distribution of jobs across workers. Specifically, native-born workers with superior language skills and communication skills start to gravitate toward jobs where that's part of the job. And immigrants with not so good language skills, that's sort of illustrating the point with language, tend to gravitate toward occupations where language skills are not as important. And the jobs in which language skills are more important tend to pay more. So there's an that triggers a sort of an odd increase in demand for native-born workers for certain occupations, raising their wages, right? So there's another demand side effect. Another effect, which turns out to be really important in the illegal case, is immigration tends to spur firm creation and expansion. Workers are much less mobile geographically than they used to be. This has occurred over the past generation. Workers do not move as much as they used to. So if you're a firm and you want to expand, or you want to create something, start something, it can be expensive to find workers. It can be expensive to attract workers. Well, if you're looking for a ready supply of workers, a place with a ready supply of workers would be a place with a large inflow of immigrants, a place that attracts immigrants. And so firms tend to locate there in cities and areas with a large volume of immigrants. They tend to locate there more frequently than in areas without that inflow. So without the inflow of immigrants to these areas, these firms wouldn't even start or they wouldn't expand. All right, now when these firms start and when they expand, they don't just hire immigrants, they hire native-born workers as well. That's a further increase in demand for native-born workers. That obviously doesn't happen overnight. That takes a little bit of time. But it happens, research shows. A further effect causing a further increase in the demand for labor is this last one. And what's going on there is K stands for capital. Okay, so when we get an inflow of immigrants, the amount of the labor force is growing. That raises the productivity of capital, of buildings, machines, and the like. It raises its productivity, raises the return to capital. So over time, what do firms do? They increase their rate of investment in capital. Right? Well, this has a further effect. More capital raises the productivity of labor. Workers become more productive with more capital than with less. That furthers the increase in demand for labor, which further increases wages and employment of native-born workers. Right? So you following me on this thing? So you have the increase in supply of workers, but then you get all this response that leads to an increase in demand for workers, including, in some cases especially, the native-born workers. So now, those last two things take a little time. You know, it takes time for firms to invest in capital. It takes time for their capital stock to grow to the point where labor productivity is increased and the firms follow with further hiring of workers. Takes time, but research shows it happens. That's why the research on immigration in the U.S. shows that over time, given a little more time, the effects of immigration on the wages and employment of native-born workers tend to be small but positive. Okay, so that's well, maybe not so briefly, a summary of the research on the effects of immigration in general, right? Immigration in general on the wages and employment of native-born workers. Well, what about illegal immigration? Well, the focus of this research, again, is on what immigration does to the wages and employment of lesser educated, low-skilled, native-born workers. And so the results I mentioned, short run, hardly any change, long run, small but positive effects. We're looking at lesser educated, lower skilled, native-born workers, and we're getting those effects. So a big chunk of those lesser skilled immigrants and lesser educated immigrants are illegals. So we're actually capturing the effects of illegal immigration on the wages and employment of lesser educated, lower skilled, native-born workers. But I just found out about this a couple weeks ago. There's a labor economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta named Julie Hotchkiss. She taught at Georgia State when I was going for my doctorate there. She's a great labor economist, and she has recently published a paper in which she examined the effects of illegal immigration on wages and employment of native-born workers in Georgia. And I know of the paper, I've read the abstract, and I'm getting it through interlibrary loan, so I can't fill you in on the details, but she found positive effects. She found wages and employment of native-born workers increasing the more illegal immigration there is. And what she identified as the leading cause was the job sorting stuff. She controlled for 1 million different things, and those are the results that she got. Okay. Now it turns out there's another way that illegal immigration benefits lesser skilled, lesser educated, native-born workers. And that is, illegal immigration provides a buffer against unemployment for native-born, lesser skilled, lesser educated workers. And this is how. The least mobile workers in the U.S. labor force are lesser educated, lesser skilled workers. They are the least mobile. They don't move very much, no matter what happens in the local economy. They're the least mobile. More mobile are naturally better educated, higher skilled, native-born workers. They move more frequently. And why do they move? To take advantage of economic opportunity. Far more mobile than those workers are illegal immigrants. They are, without question, the most mobile workers in the economy. They go from place to place very quickly. It's not uncommon for these people to have one job in one part of the country the first 3 months of the year, another job in another part of the country the next 3 months out of the year, and the pattern grows. It's also not uncommon for them to have a job one part of the country the first 3 months of the year, another job in the next 3 months of the year, then they leave the country and come back 4 or 5 months later. They're extremely sensitive to changes in economic conditions, both in the U.S., in their home country, and within the U.S. Extremely sensitive. I calculated the correlation coefficient for real GDP in the U.S. and those CMS estimates of the illegal population over that time period from 1990 to 2010. Right, and a correlation coefficient, we would expect it to be positive. So perfectly correlated is 1. The correlation coefficient was 0.993. These people are unbelievably sensitive to economic conditions in this country, within this country, and where they're leaving from. So they're incredibly mobile, which stands to reason, because who the hell is going to do this? Right? What kind of people are willing to run the risks of entering a country illegally, run the risk of being deported for work? Well, people who aren't really averse to that, right? People who, that doesn't bother them that much. So they self-select. The most mobile people are the people who tend to do this, right? So it's hardly a surprise that once they're here, they move all over the place. Right? They move all over the place in response to economic opportunities. So the way this provides a buffer for unemployment, or at least it did in the last recession to a significant degree, is in this way. And I know some of you are dying for graphs, so there you go. All right, so what's going on up there is there's the demand for labor. Think of D1, that's the initial demand for labor. SN is the supply of native-born workers. So what you see there is a graph of a community with no illegal immigrants. Okay, there's no illegal immigrants there. They're only native-born workers. If you don't like graphs, it's okay. We can do it in words too. And we will, right? Because I like to cater to the audience. Okay, so what that means is, suppose there's a nasty downturn in the economy. There's a nasty recession, sort of like the one that came along at the end of 2007 and lasted through the middle of 2009 and even longer in other places. Okay, so there's a nasty recession. The demand for labor really falls. And what we find in labor markets is that firms are really averse to cut people's wages. They don't like cutting people's wages for a variety of reasons. It's lousy for morale, causes all kinds of problems. It's difficult to do if you have a bigger firm and there's a whole wage structure. You know, just not a policy firms tend to resort to, which means wages don't move. They don't move downward. They're sticky, as we say in economics. Okay, so we have no change or little decrease in wages, big decrease in the demand for labor. What happens? There's a significant increase in native-born unemployment. And the unemployment, I mean, you can see it with the red arrow there, is the difference between the initial level of employment of native-born, lesser-skilled workers, that's L with a subscript N1, and then the new level of employment is L with the subscript N2. So you get this big increase in native-born unemployment. That's when there aren't any illegal immigrants around. Okay, now when in a community when there are illegal immigrants or a significant population of illegals, this is what the graph looks like. So we have this nasty downturn, big decrease in the demand for labor. What do the native-born workers do? They stay. What do the illegals do? They get out of there. They leave. They go away because it's a crummy economy now. If it's a local economy, which is sort of what we're looking at, you know, they go somewhere else where conditions are better. Somewhere else could be back home. But they go somewhere else, they leave. Okay, now do you see why that's a buffer against unemployment for native-born, lesser-skilled workers? There's a big decrease in the demand for labor. The illegals leave, and the natives are left with not all their jobs, but there's a much smaller decrease in employment of native-born workers when there's a significant illegal population that leaves when conditions deteriorate. So in this graph, you know, you can see the difference. The unemployment now among native-born, lesser-skilled workers is the difference between LN1 and LN2, just like it was before, but it's much smaller. So there have been recent papers on this by a guy, Brian Cadena and Brian Kovac, and Cadena's done even more on this. And this is what he looked at. This is exactly what he looked at. He looked at the effects of the recession on employment of lesser-skilled, native-born workers across the U.S. in metropolitan statistical areas with significant illegal populations and those without. And this is exactly what he found. He found that the decrease in employment of lesser-skilled, native-born workers was roughly 40% less in areas with significant illegal populations than in areas with hardly any. And what he found was the greater the population of illegals, the greater the buffer. So the smaller the decrease in employment of native-born, lesser-skilled workers. Okay? So that's another way in which illegal immigration, the evidence shows, helps the people who it supposedly hurts. Okay. So the last thing I'll talk about here is, well, we can do a couple of things. A lot of people are concerned about the fiscal effects of illegal immigration and how illegal immigration affects the federal government's budget and then state and local governments' budgets. And associated with that is the view that welfare programs, social safety net programs, whatever you want to call them, are a magnet for illegals. And again, that part is really easy to refute. Because illegal immigrants are essentially eligible for two government benefits: K through 12 education emergency medical care. And that's basically it. There are, you can find an outlier here, or there are some mortgage subsidy programs. But if you're an illegal immigrant, you don't qualify, you're ineligible for all the rest of the stuff. Social Security, TANF, food stamps, you don't get any of it. Right? So that's the welfare side. Another way of showing that these people aren't here for welfare is to look at labor force participation rates. Labor force participation rate is the percentage of the working age population that's in the labor force, is either employed or is not working but looking for work. Here are the labor force participation rates. And these are very recent. These are 2014 labor force participation rates. So you can see for native-born workers, native-born men, 67.3% of the working age male population is in the labor force. For women, it's 57.5%. For foreign-born, the percentage of men in the labor force is higher, but for women, it's lower. The highest labor force participation rates, both for men and women, are among the illegal population. That 91% rate is unbelievable. It's incredibly high. You will never find in the history of labor force participation in the United States the native-born percentage getting anywhere near that. It's high, back in 1920, 1910, but it's not 91%. That's an unbelievably high labor force participation rate. And the percentage for the women is on the high side too, though it's lower than for men. So what does this tell you? They're here to work. That's why they're here. They're here to work. That's what they're doing. They're working. And then I put the labor force participation rates for the population as a whole of lesser skilled workers, right? So the labor force participation rate for the labor force, for the working age population in the country as a whole, for people with less than a high school diploma is 58.3%, and for women it's 32.3%. Now remember, half of illegals, according to estimates, are people with less than a high school degree. And, that suggests, and that sort of highlights that high rate of labor force participation even further. As far as the fiscal effects are concerned, and I know I'm pushing the time a little bit here, it's very difficult to assess the full fiscal effects of illegal immigration. Because it's complicated. First of all, illegals pay a lot of taxes. This is a surprise to lots of people. But the Social Security Administration estimates that illegal immigrants pay around $13 billion in payroll taxes each year. They estimate that somewhere around 50% of illegals actually pay payroll taxes, and the estimates are that illegals pay about $13 billion in state and local taxes as well. Sales taxes, property taxes, and the like. The reason it's so difficult, though, to assess the fiscal effects is you have to figure out, okay, what time frame are we looking at? Right, here are these people that just get here. Well, what happens to them? Right, some of them leave. The ones who stay have children who are legal. Well, what happens to them? What do they do? How much do they contribute in taxes in their lifetime? And, how much do they draw from, federal revenues in their lifetime? One thing about illegals is they're coming here with some education, in a lot of cases not all that much, but who paid for it? Not us, right? Their home country paid for their education, paid for that investment in human capital, and then who's reaping the benefits? This country. Unlike most of us here, the state here paid for our human capital, our education, and now we're working. So how far do you want to go? How do you want to look at just this generation? Do you want to look at further down the road? There's a big difference. There's a big difference. Do you want to look at the federal level? Do you want to look at state and local levels? The federal government really makes out handsomely from illegal immigration. Because it's not paying out almost anything in federal benefits. Most of the benefits are paid for that illegals draw, right? Emergency medical care and K through 12 education, that's state and local government. So there can be big differences there. The upshot is it's really hard to calculate the fiscal effects. The estimates that have been done are that basically it's a wash. It's a wash. There's not a big burden of illegal immigration on federal, state, or local governments. See, and even then you have to be careful because, okay, what do you want to do with border patrol? Where do you want to put the almost $20 billion in the budget of Homeland Security to prevent illegal immigration? You want to put that in there too somehow, in some way, I guess. How you would do that, I'm not quite so sure. Anyway, that's enough. So if you have any questions, I'm going to take anything you want.
How do they run the analytics for people who are crossing back and forth over the border so they're not double, triple, quadruple counted?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Tony. And the answer is, in economic analysis, it's hard to keep track of those people, though in the analysis itself, it's almost there, right? Especially when you look at the unemployment buffer. Those people are leaving. They're leaving those areas. So whether they go back or not, who knows? Where estimates of illegals crossing back and forth really come from is Homeland Security. We have 23,000 Border Patrol agents. And a lot of the people that they apprehend are people they've apprehended before, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And so they're able to derive, I don't know exactly how, some estimates for the mobility. Does that answer your?
It's getting there, yeah.
It is really hard to keep track of, to count all this stuff. But with the data that these people have and the tricks that demographers are able to do, they feel relatively confident about a lot of these numbers. One thing you can see too in the numbers for the illegal population is it's, if anything, since 2009, it's declined. And so what that means is, okay, people are still coming in, more people are leaving. Any other questions? Yeah.
Don, one of the biggest concerns from a border security perspective is particularly the number of visa overstays, since we're aware that all of the 9/11 terrorists were in fact visa overstays. Are you aware of any research that's going on to indicate whether those numbers are going up or down?
Yeah, I'm not, Cindy. I don't know about what I'm sure they're available. That website is incredibly transparent. I was able to find, all the Department of Homeland Security numbers, even their budgets. You go to that site, it takes you 22 seconds, and they're all up in front of you. So I'm sure they have some data or estimates somewhere on that. Yeah.
more questions if you have time. Given that most all this information that we were talking about today has to do with the undereducated, lower skilled population, have you been hearing anything in your circles about the more controversial use of the H-1B visas, where it's the highly skilled workers that are coming in, and the congressional testimony that's been going on regarding the misuse by Disney and other sectors of that particular program?
Yeah, I've heard some, and I know the economic angle. The immigration policy can be really complex because you can do so many different things. From an economic angle, you can really argue that illegal immigration is better than legal immigration. Even though, you hear a lot of people say, oh, I'm okay with legal immigrants, it's the illegals that I don't like. Well, the problem is the way immigration is set up now, as you well know, is the primary way you enter the country and become a legal immigrant is through family ties. It has absolutely nothing to do with the state of the economy. It has nothing to do with, the job market in this occupation or that occupation, whereas illegal immigration targets that directly, right? And then for every increase in demand in some occupation in some place, here come the illegals. Well, if you're going at it from a purely economic perspective, which I know is unrealistic, but from a purely economic perspective, you would actually let the market work. You would even set up these visa things. You just say, okay, here's this, look at these salaries for these high-skilled workers. All right, well, let them come. Just let them come. And then when the salaries start to ebb, then so will the entrance of those kind of workers. And, with the lesser skilled illegals, what's really interesting about this case is, there's like half of them are people with less than a high school degree. Well, as the numbers of illegals increased, the percentage of the native-born population that's high school dropouts shrunk considerably. So these illegals are coming in to fill a hole that those people left. They're responding to the economic situation, the market situation. Now, I know I don't mean to dance around your question. It's just when people, when the government is establishing how many, H-1B visas we have and all the other H's and all the rest of this stuff, it's really kind of arbitrary. Now, what some countries do, Canada, Australia, is if you're a well-educated person, they roll out the red carpet to you. I mean, you can become a Canadian citizen if you have a college education like that. It's a bigger hassle to get your driver's license renewed here, I think. And that's what they've decided to do. That's not economic either. They're just thinking, look, the more of these kind of people we have, the more growth that's going to generate. Again, from a purely economic perspective, okay, you got these high-skilled workers, but there are a lot of jobs where you want lesser-skilled workers. And, they can go wanting if you don't allow these people to go. So that's a standard economist answer to a simple question. Too much. But.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much.